call to order the James City County Planning Commission special meeting for October 17th, 2018. Mr. Holt, will you please call the roll?
Ms. Leverins.
Here.
Ms. Leverins is an at-large member. Mr. Polster.
Here.
Mr. Polster represents the Jamestown District. Mr. Haldeman.
Here.
Mr. Haldeman represents the Berkeley District. Mr. Schmidt.
Here.
Mr. Schmidt represents the Roberts District and is this year's Vice Chair. Mr. O'Connor.
Here.
Mr. O'Connor is an at-large member. Mr. Kropp.
Here.
Mr. Kropp represents the Powhatan District and Mr. Richardson.
Here.
Mr. Richardson represents the Stonehouse District and is this year's Chair. I'm Paul Holt, Director of Community Development and Planning for the county, and sitting to my left is Mr. Max Halavin, our Deputy County Attorney. Mr. Chairman, we have a quorum.
Thank you, Mr. Holt. At this time, we will move to the public comment period, and I believe we have a speaker card this evening. Got you, okay. Is there anyone in the public that would like to make a comment? Typically, the public comment period is for topics not subject to the public hearing. Seeing and hearing no one, we will close the public comment section and go to reports of the commission. And in the month of September, correct me if I'm wrong, but we did not have a policy nor a DRC. Got it. And we will move on now to the consent agenda. Consent agenda items are determined to be non-controversial. However, a planning commissioner can pull away any item for discussion. There is simply one item for consideration, and that is the minutes of September 5th, 2018. Are there any edits or?
Move approval.
So moved. As motion on the floor, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you. And we will move on to the public hearing section. Our first public hearing this evening, SUP 18-0011, 750 Blow Flats Road Borough Pit Renewal, and SUP-18-0023, 700 Blow Flats Road Borough Pit Renewal, with two separate actions in this case. Ms. Costello.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the Planning Commission. Mr. J. Lipscomb has applied on behalf of USA Waste of Virginia, Incorporated, and Branscombe, Incorporated, to renew their special use permits in order to continue the operation of borrow pits located at 700 and 750 Blow Flats Road. Both parcels are zoned M2, General Industrial, and are designated as General Industry on the Comprehensive Plan. The borrow pit operation involves excavating topsoil, dirt, sand, and clay from the property for use at other sites. There is an active mining permit from the Virginia Department of Mines, Minerals, and Energy, and impacts associated with the borrow pits are overseen by the state through the applicant's operational plan. Special use permits, one for each property, were approved by the Board of Supervisors in 1992 to allow for the continued operation of these facilities. At that time, in order to give staff the opportunity to reevaluate the impacts of the operation, a 5-year time limit was placed on the permits as a condition of approval. In 1997, the special use permits were reevaluated and renewed for a subsequent 3 years. In 2000 and again in 2005, the special use permits were again renewed with a 5-year time limit as a condition of their approval. In 2010, the special use permits were again renewed with an 8-year time limit. The two existing special use permits will expire on December 31st, 2018. As part of the current renewal process, the applicant has requested that the Board of Supervisors renew the two special use permits without any time limit. Staff recommends an 8-year time limit on the special use permits due to constantly evolving regulations regarding environmental protection. Staff finds having an opportunity to review the conditions of the operation allows the county to address these changes and any other impacts. The intentions of the applicant and the county are for this property to be redeveloped for economic development purposes in the future or have the capability for such redevelopment. All agencies have reviewed both SUP renewal applications and recommend approval with the proposed conditions. Recommended uses for the General Industrial District include industrial operations with office and commercial as secondary. Staff finds that the proposal to be consistent with the 2035 Comprehensive Plan, the zoning ordinance, and surrounding development. Staff recommends that the Planning Commission recommend approval of this application to the Board of Supervisors, subject to the conditions listed in the staff report. I'm happy to answer any questions you may have, as is Mr. Lipscomb. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Costello. Any questions from our staff report?
Just had one. Who's responsible for reviewing the reclamation? Is that the Virginia's Department of Mines?
Yes.
They do that?
Yes.
Okay, thanks.
And then just as a follow-on, so they would have to reclaim before they could exceed 60 acres, is that right? This says no more than 60 acres will be disturbed at any one time, so they'll have to reclaim areas, do we know?
We'll defer to the applicant for clarification. I don't believe so. I think it's just what is under an active land disturbing permit. So, they may not be particularly active in a cell while they move on to another, but whether or not that cell is closed in perpetuity such that the reclamation plan needs to be implemented, or the fact that it's just not, everything is stabilized, it's just not being mined in, but maybe they'll come back to it in another couple of years, such that at any given point, the 60 acres is the most being actively disturbed. Again, I'll defer to the applicant, but that's my understanding.
Else for staff? Thank you. Thanks very much. And Mr. Lipscomb. Welcome, sir. If you could just please state your name and address.
Thank you. My name is Julian H. Lipscomb, Jr. I'm the environmental manager with Branscombe Incorporated. And one of my many tasks is...
Pardon me, Mr. Lipscomb. The public hearing is now open. Thank you.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Oversight on my part. Sorry. Go ahead, please.
So, as I was saying, one of my many tasks is, as environmental managers, I apply for all permits and ensure we comply with them. So that's why we're here. And I thank you for entertaining our project tonight. And I thank staff for their help in getting us to this point. Just to give you a little bit of history, we have continuously mined on that site since the early 70s. And at the time, it was 2 parcels. One was owned by William Lee, and the second parcel was owned by Mr. James Bickford. So back in the early days, it was known as Lee Bickford Pit for us. It's 2 separate parcels, but it's permitted with the state mines under 1 permit. So that's what some of the confusion may be why we're having 2 hearings. But back in the early 90s, Mr. Lee sold his property to Branscombe, and sometime after that, Mr. Bickford sold his to Santafill, which is USA Waste of Virginia. They run the Bethel landfill. So their intent is to mine clay to cap their landfills. Our property has sandy clay mix, which we're able to mine for borrow material and road projects and what have you. So with that, we have an agreement with USA Waste that since we've got the permit in our name, the mine permit, and we're applied for all the local permits, that we mine for their benefit should they ever need clay. And so that we have not mined at Santafill probably for a couple of years because they haven't needed landfill clay. Our property is continuously being mined. We just recently, we probably mined over 90,000 tons, close to 100,000 tons this year, with a big chunk of it going to the city of Newport News' Atkins Boulevard, which is the new bridge as you see over Interstate 64. So the area has been good for us to sell material. So our intent post-mining is to reclaim the property for development. It's a valuable industrial property, and we recognize that, just the county does. So that is our goal. So we have been good stewards of the land, and we've been good neighbors. And I don't see any of that changing because there's a benefit for everybody with us doing the proper thing with the reclamation. So in closing, I would respectfully request that the SUP be approved in perpetuity without an expiration date. That's the one deviation that I talked with staff about that we'd like to see if that were possible, if you all would consider entertaining that. Other than that, I would be happy to answer any questions.
Sure, thank you. My colleagues, Mr. Bolster.
Yeah, I just wanted a little bit of clarification, and by the way, we happened to chat before we got started, which is why I think this is helpful. Is one of the things I noticed in the staff report, it talks about a set of standards that you have to comply with in terms of the compaction of the area after you've mined it on that. Could you talk about both the state requirements and then the county environments that you participate in any year?
Yeah, now, the State Division of Mines, Minerals, and Energy is the primary agency that oversees the reclamation of mining, borrow pits and quarries and what have you. And what we're doing is we're bringing dirt back off construction jobs, inert fill that we backfill in the area, pushing them with the dozer, compacting it, and continuously putting in lifts of sand or material, earth, to bring the property back up to developable grades is what our goal is.
The inspection for that takes place by who and when?
The Division of Mines, Minerals, and Energy inspects us a minimum of twice a year. We also are inspected by the federal mine folks, MSHA. They're more from a safety standpoint, but the state does the inspections for both safety and reclamation, environmental, erosion sediment control.
On the county side?
The county side, one of the conditions that is on our use permit is that we provide a report of how many acres are disturbed. And you normally call in December and have a field trip with staff from the environmental and the zoning departments. We drive around the pits, and I point out areas that I'm calling disturbed under the county's definition, so that when I go to have the maps drawn, we're in concurrence that those areas are.
Certify a report to the county on an annual basis then?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. We've been doing that for a number of cycles.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Bolster.
So, kind of along those lines, I was more curious about where the land meets the wetlands, and reading in the report a couple places where it kind of, I've grown up on the waterways around here, so I'm not familiar with this creek, but ones like it. And what I envision is it sounds like it's okay to take away some land and then it becomes tidal or wetlands. Is that would that be like a peninsula being?
We have left that option open for the Santafill property. Should Santafill want to try and get into wetlands mitigation banking, that it's an option. That area has not been backfilled, so it's still low grade, that really all you'd have to do is some minor grade work and cut a plug to connect it tidally.
Yeah, so that's to the left there.
But lately it hadn't been much demand for wetlands mitigation banks, but that's a business opportunity that they're leaving open.
And then I guess my concern there would just be, when you've mined an area, obviously you've got loose sediment along the banks, and then if you're opening up to the wetlands, but I guess the powers that be oversee that.
Well, the areas where this would happen have been mined for years and reclaimed. And so the slopes are 4-to-1, and the vegetation is regrown on the slopes.
Okay.
So I wouldn't see that. Matter of fact, one of the areas that we reclaimed, we got an honorable mention from the state for mine reclamation award. So that was kind of nice. Didn't get the big prize, but we were honorably mentioned.
Well, it's nice to know the vegetation's growing back up on.
It does. We have to seed it, and that's one of the requirements of the Department of Mines, is that we stabilize to keep banks from eroding.
Thank you.
Sir.
Thank you. Anyone else?
I do have one question. Maybe this is for staff. Over the years of these renewals, have there been environmental changes that have actually made it appropriate for us to put a time limit on these?
I don't believe there's been any changes as far as the RPA boundaries or the floodplain, but I think we would like to keep that option open should there be any changes.
Thank you, Ms. Lawrence. And anyone else?
The 8 years is longer than it was at the outset, right? I mean, we've lengthened, the county has lengthened the 8-year time for SUPs from the, as I read the history, from, I think it went from 4 years to 8 years.
Right.
Okay.
I asked for this with staff last cycle, and we got a compromise, and he gave us 2 more years, or to 8 years. So.
And thank you, Mr. Lipscomb. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Is there anyone else here who would like to comment? Seeing and hearing no one, we will close the public hearing, and I'll look to my colleagues for discussion and or a motion.
I'm inclined to support the application. I'd be uncomfortable making it an unlimited period of time.
So you were comfortable or uncomfortable?
Uncomfortable.
Okay. But could we extend it further? Make it 10?
Yeah, I was going to ask a similar question.
It's a recommendation from the PC board. Wouldn't have the benefit of, want to make that motion tonight and forward that on. We don't have stormwater and resource protection staff here tonight to sort of have that dialogue with them. Should that be the recommendation of the PC, what we could, as staff, do is potentially circle back around with the appropriate James City County staff and include that narrative in context and sort of staff have any other information to provide the board in terms of any material differences between the 8 and the 10, we could include that as part of the staff report update that we send to the board.
I've got a question then to add to that. If it stayed at the 8, and let's just say that there's some change that happens with the second parcel that they now want to do something, would something be triggered for the county then to come back in and take a look at this again and see what they're going to do, to see whatever impact it may cause for whatever it's going to, because they haven't minded for a number of years?
Unless it was an application, a property owner or applicant-based request, the county would probably pick that up on any subsequent renewal request after the 8 years.
So that if it's something that's permitted, it could happen by right.
Oh, sure. By virtue of this SUP, they're not restricting themselves or otherwise carving out other M2, M1. M1 zone property, M2. They're not limiting themselves to other M2 permitted uses. Yeah, so theoretically, those could come back in the door and wouldn't have to do anything different or wouldn't have to do anything with the SUP. They would just apply to go through the process.
My rationale for suggesting 10 is that there doesn't seem to have been any major changes, and given that history, that perhaps 10 years would be appropriate.
What would be our general consensus then? I think to Mr. Halderman's point, are you comfortable with where it is now, or would you be amenable to any kind of increase?
I don't have a strong opinion, 8 years or 10 years, either one, but I think we should have a cap to it.
Yeah, absolutely.
I agree with Mr. Halderman.
Yeah, me as well.
I'm somewhat in Mr. Haldeman's camp, I think. Nothing against Mr. Lipscomb or who he represents, but, you know, if that property were to change hands, you know, that might give rise to other concerns as an operator that's an unknown. So I think to have a sunset on it, and I think 8 years is if we're you know, we're pushing it out an extra 2 years, I think 8 years is reasonable.
I would agree.
I concur. Any further questions of staff or discussion? This is unique because we would have 2 actions. So if I could entertain a motion, it would be part.
Chairman, I move that we approve SUP 18-0011 for 750 Blow Flats Road, and special use permit 18-0023 for 700 Blowfats Road, subject to the conditions included in the staff report.
Thank you, Mr. Krapp. Motion is on the floor. Mr. Holt?
Thank you.
Sir, would you call the
Is
roll?
that as amended by the 10-year?
Well, no, I mean, that's what I'm getting
Clarification?
ready to clarify, is that,
Okay.
Mr. Crop, just to clarify your motion, please let me know if it's different, but your motion was to recommend approval with the conditions in the staff report, which includes the 8-year timeframe.
Correct.
Ah,
Okay.
yes. Thank you.
On the floor, Ms. Leverins,
Aye.
Mr. Polster,
Aye.
Mr. Haldeman,
Aye.
Mr. O'Connor,
Aye.
Mr. Crop.
Aye.
Mr. Schmidt.
Aye.
And Mr. Richardson.
Aye.
Thank you. Motion carries.
Thank you, Mr. Holt. And we will now open public hearing for SUP-18-0024. Pardon me. Welcome, Mr. Baruch, to you for the SUP Christ Community Church Multipurpose Building.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
You bet.
And members of the commission. Ms. Melissa Sheaves of DJG Inc. has submitted an application for a place of public assembly on 9001 Richmond Road to construct a multipurpose building at the existing Christ Community Church. The property is currently zoned A1 General Agricultural and is designated rural lands on the 2035 Comprehensive Plan Land Use Map. The church was built between the late 80s and early 90s and has been in operation since that time. In August 2017, the zoning ordinance was amended to change the places of public assembly use to a specially permitted use in the A1 zoning district. The proposed addition of the multipurpose building to the property requires that the entire property come into conformance with the current zoning ordinance. Staff finds this proposal to be compatible with surrounding development and consistent with the 2035 Comprehensive Plan and zoning ordinance. Staff recommends that the Planning Commission recommend approval of this application to the Board of Supervisors, subject to the proposed conditions. I'll be happy to answer any questions you may have, and the applicant is also available. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Baruch. And I had gotten ahead of myself, so to my colleagues, do we have any questions of staff? Clarifications?
Yeah, I just have one. I'm unclear about the entrance. The entrance has been merged into driveway of the neighboring. Where is that on the master plan? I had a hard
Yes.
time envisioning that.
So right here, currently there's a driveway that goes right out to Richmond Road for the adjacent property residence that goes back into this area. VDOT made a comment saying that they were too close together for VDOT's requirements, so they asked to combine those two, and the resident driveway is now going to come off of the existing driveway of the church to reduce 2 access points off Richmond Road just to 1.
So it'll merge onto the church property and then out onto Richmond Road.
That's correct.
Okay.
Anyone else? Thank you, Mr. Burke. We will now open the public hearing for SUP 18-0024. If there's anyone, no speaker cards? Anyone would like to speak? Seeing and hearing no one, we will close the public hearing and look to my colleagues for discussion or a motion.
I appreciated the staff's additional documentation that they provided, especially in clarifying where the BMP was in relationship to the septic area and the new addition. And that was very helpful to me. It also seemed to indicate to me that one of the questions I asked was and we had this in a similar case, is the impervious surface for the new parking lot. And as I looked at those diagrams, it looked like that the new parking lot was going to be gravel, which would be impervious, which I thought was really a nice adjustment to help out with the stormwater piece. As I said, the additional diagrams were helpful because it also showed and indicated where the drainage was going to come off of the impervious surfaces, which were going to be re-asphalted as well as the driveway opened up. So that was very helpful for me, and I appreciate that.
I'd just like to congratulate staff and the applicant for the comprehensiveness of this packet. It was complete. There was a lot of information in there. It was clear. It was self-explanatory. I mean, there weren't terms that weren't defined. It was, congratulations.
I move to approve.
So moved. Holt, motion on the floor. Will you call the roll, please?
Thank you. Ms. Leverins.
Aye.
Mr. Polster.
Aye.
Mr. Haldeman.
Aye.
Mr. O'Connor.
Aye.
Mr. Crop.
Aye.
Mr. Schmidt.
Aye.
And Mr. Richardson.
Aye.
Thank you. Motion carries.
Thank you, Mr. Holt. And we will move on now to Planning Commission considerations.
On the agenda tonight from staff, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. And now on to your report, Mr. Holt.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman and members of the commission. Other than what's been printed and included in your agenda packets, I don't have anything additional tonight. But
I believe there are, sir. Thank you. And we will move on to Planning Commission discussion and requests. I believe that's it. We are adjourned. Oh. Motion to adjourn. Off my game tonight.
Mother may I.
All those in favor?
Aye.
We're adjourned.